Hello everyone and welcome to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters across the franchised and independent dealer sectors.
Hello and welcome to this Motor Trade Radio weekday special. We're delighted to welcome back Jeremy Yea, Senior Valuations Editor at CAP HPI, joining us for his roundup of how trade values performed in February. And just to provide some context, when we last spoke to Jeremy a month ago, he reported that January showed further signs of a return to more familiar seasonal normality, following several months of stability for trade values in 2024. So we're about to find out if that continued into February. Welcome back to the pod, Jeremy.
Yeah, morning, Curtis. Thanks for having me back.
You're more than welcome. I always assume that this time of the month, this last week, is a particularly busy time because you're closing the editorial, aren't you?
Absolutely, yeah. It's always a busy time. It's a busy time in any week, but it seems to be a little bit magnified somewhat coming into the back end of the month and getting to our monthly deadline. But yeah, it's been good.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, you are still, because you're managing a live product, you've still got the daily activities of monitoring the market movements in the live environment, as well as closing down the month for the editorial and the month end results that you get, aren't you?
Definitely, yeah. It's a busy time, as I said, from week to week and day to day. It gets a little bit busier towards as we get to deadline. But yeah, it's been good.
It's never a boring day, is it? Never a boring day.
Absolutely not.
Never a dull moment in the motor trade, Jeremy.
Don't we all know it? I mean, as always, Jeremy, let's kick off with, walk us through the headline, trade value movement for that 3-year 60 benchmark that we know went up 0.4%, or the equivalent of thereabouts £40 on average. But how they compare, how does that movement compare with previous Februaries and what you expected for the month of February itself?
I think the beginning of the month we thought it'd probably be positive. I think we saw a quick turn from our monthly deadline, so the last few days of January it quickly turned positive. And it's continued to sort of be stable, positive, and it's been quite slow to move up. I think at the beginning of the month we thought we might see a more of an increase than 0.4, as you've noted, where we ended up. We thought we might get to 1%, and I remember, my famous words are probably at the end of the last podcast saying, we could get to 1% or more, dare I say it, and unfortunately we didn't get to that point. But that's not to say that that it's still been a really stable and positive month overall. I think if you look at previous February into March in terms of February live values into the March monthly, last year went up 0.7 the same period, and in 2023 it went up 1%. When you go back to pre-COVID, it's a little bit more mixed, but around sort of flat or slightly positive. It's a little bit, a little bit variation, but it fits nicely in line. The seasonal average is 0.3 since going back to 2012 when Cap Live was introduced. So it's just above the seasonal average. And I think I've said before, it sort of fits in where we probably, think, I guess, more predictable and more seasonal feelings around the marketplace, and especially after the stability of, the entire year of last year.
And I mean, we talk about how the market performs, because I said right at the start there that, you look at the data on day by day, it's a live product as we know. Was it kind of fairly flat throughout the month, or did it start off fairly strong and then slow down, or how did it kind of perform throughout the month? Because, it didn't quite, as you say, it didn't get that 1%. I think some were over predicting at sort of 1.5%, which was unrealistic. But was it just fairly flat throughout? Was there any sort of troughs and peaks in that?
I think, like I said, the last few days of January did quickly uptick to, I think, the 0.1%. And we thought, okay, well, we're going to have probably quite a strong month. But then it was slow to sort of move, even to 0.2. It seemed to take days or even, a good few days to get to 0.2. and very slow getting to point 3 and point 4, by the time we cut off our deadline at the end of the month. So it was really quite stable. There wasn't many fluctuations, I would say. I think when you look at the 3-year point, it's probably good to highlight the fact that when you just look at ICE vehicles in isolation, it actually went up 0.6 at 3 years. So slightly more than the average. Now we're seeing some more volume of electric vehicles coming in. I guess we'll touch on that in a minute. But that seems to have brought down the overall average. So that may have softened some of the increases that we would have seen, maybe particularly a little bit earlier in the month. But, I think a 0.4 is still a really, really strong result. And it's been really good across the market, and sort of feedback we've felt, what we've heard, and sentiment we've picked up, both trade and retail. It's been nicely matched.
And Jeremy, looking at age bands, you spotted some interesting trends around some of the older, higher mileage cars, didn't you?
Yeah, it's the older value end of the market, which has been very resilient. Really quite strong in some cases. At 5-year 80, it went up 0.8%, and at 10-year 100k, it went up nearly 2%, 1.7%. So yeah, really strong in the older age points for sure. And I think that's where the value end of the market really sits, and that's the sweet spot, I think, for retailers and trade buyers. It really is.
And in terms of market segments, some of the sectors you look at, did anything stand out? I mean, I did notice there was a welcome uptick for convertibles.
Yeah, time of year. I think if you're going to stop one, now's the time to buy one and try and stop one. We are seeing in some areas of the country, certainly where I've lived, some sunny times. We've had a little bit of rain and wind and what have you, but we're getting towards springtime, and I think it's a sort of different sort of mindset for both retail consumers and retailers selling convertibles and coupe cabriolets. So yeah, coupe cabriolet went up a couple of percent. Convertible went up 1.2% at 3 years. So yeah, they were pretty positive and probably in line with expectation, to be honest.
Yeah, I was going to say it was a brave dealer who was buying convertibles in January and certainly February, bearing in mind the weather. And looking at some of the other segments, anything stand out in terms of SUVs?
Yeah, SUVs were positive. That's the largest volume that we see within our database. Probably makes up more than 60% at 3 years, and it's been ever growing for the last decade or more. SUVs were up overall; it was up 0.3. There was a little bit of disparity or a little bit of difference. Small SUVs at 3 years went up 0.7, medium went up 0.4, and the larger SUVs stayed flat, which I think is still positive. But again, the cheaper end of the market, I think, sits nicely with maybe some of those small and medium SUVs. And I think for some of the other mainstream sectors as well, City Car went up 1.3%, lower medium, the hatchback sector, medium size, sort of Astra Focus, that went up nearly 1%. Super Mini went up nearly 1% as well. So I think the value end of the market is still really quite strong across both retail and trade. So, and that's reflected in our monthly numbers.
Yeah, just on that convertible bit, you are seeing a lot more people sat with in their car parks and on the roads with the roofs down, with the scarves on and hats on and big winter coats, aren't you? That are trying to sort of capitalise on the sun being out, but still a little bit chilly outside. But yeah, you do get to see that. And I mean, you mentioned right at the start there, we sort of get onto the subject of fuel type, and once again, battery electric vehicles remains obviously the key discussion point across the sector, especially as wholesale volumes continue to increase. I mean, how did they perform over the course of February? And obviously, as a follow-up to that, which models, stood out in terms of drops and rises in that?
So electric still under a little bit of pressure, probably more pressure maybe in some of the older age points than we probably thought there would be, given the value that they offer in the market. But 3 years 60, they went down 1.6%, which is roughly about £350. And at the 1 year point, it's down a little bit more. Same in terms of 1.6%, but in terms of pound note value, down about £530. So yeah, there was a little bit of more of a drop off. I think, some of the strong new car offers, discounts, some of the support that maybe some of the OEMs are putting into that younger piece is I guess rippling into the 1, 2 year, even 3 year points in terms of monthly payments and what have you. So yeah, it's a little bit more mixed there in terms of the models. I've got some of the OEMs. It's like Tesla Model 3. That continued on a bit of a fall, but even though that offers superb value, that was down for the pre-current model. That was down nearly 5% at 3 years. I think Polestar, that went down a couple of percent. Some of the Peugeot stuff went down just over 3% overall. But you can't really talk about electric vehicles as a whole, and even by manufacturer now, it is broken up down by the specific models. And as we always say, and we always repeat, the devil's in the detail. It really is. And there's lots of variations within the electric market. I think 30% stayed level. There was a few handfuls that went up, and there was obviously some which came down, but they're still trying to jostle and find their position against relative terms, against either petrol or hybrid equivalents if they exist, and also against some of their peers in the market as well. So it's very volatile within that, and it's really clear to see within the data feeds we get. But our data feeds now are extremely full of EV data coming through the wholesale channels, and we saw a record amount of EV volumes for January, and a 20% increase over our previous biggest month, which I think was October last year. So, and that's set to continue now for possibly month on month and from here on in.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it remains a volatile sector because of the new entrants and the usual ones finding their place in the market. But positive signs, because you are getting a bit of stability in terms of parity on demand, parity on conversion, parity of performance against cap on a general basis. And as you say, there are some outliers that are pulling that average down in the overall. But in terms of petrol and diesel, you talk about that marginal increase of the market at 0.4. It would have been slightly more for petrol and diesel at 0.6 if you remove the EV out of it. What's been happening in that petrol and diesel sector, and any kind of strong markets or strong sectors within that?
I think across the board, really, I think, petrol seems to be the favoured fuel type still for retailers, whether that's through supermarkets and franchise and independents. Petrol went up 0.8 overall at 3 year 60. Hybrid, self-charging hybrid, if you like, as one of the manufacturers has tagged it, that 0.7. And diesel even seen another increase of 0.2. Even though diesels have been demonised now for a while, they're still really sought after within the used market. So it seems that the ISA generally seem to be the go-to fuel types for a lot of dealers still, even though the EVs show a hell of a lot of value, and sometimes, they're thousands of pounds less to buy, and to retail. So yeah, it's definitely a positive place, more positive place across the piece that we look at anyway for ICE vehicles for sure.
Fantastic. Well, we'll be back with more from Jeremy and Cap HPI's analysis of February's used car trade values after this short break.
You're listening to All the Chatter That Matters, a special weekday episode of Motor Trade Radio, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising.
Now, Jeremy, each month you analyse retail activity by days to sell. How did they perform over the course of February compared to January?
A little bit more positive, actually. There was an increase in a decrease in days to sell across all the drivetrains, and especially for electric. But I think as the retail market's picked up, that's become a little more positive, I guess, through the back end of January and throughout February, and I think it's set to continue for a while yet. The retail market, the retail database that we monitor, all performance indicators are showing in the right direction in terms of activity and days to sell. So yeah, it seems positive, really positive.
And what did they end up averaging over the course of the month?
I think electric's down to under 30 days now overall, which is really positive, and that just sort of ticked up. I think there was a small increase from the back end of last year going over the winter period, or certainly the Christmas period, and that just reduced a little bit again as we come into the new year, and as things start to pick up as they naturally do in the market throughout January. Obviously January is a little bit slower to get going, but February seeing some real positives, and certainly sentiment that we've picked picked up, either whether that's through data or whether that's through sentiment, that the retail's actually been pretty good across the board. Some performing better than others, depending on what they're selling and how they're selling and how they price. But yeah, generally it's a pretty good market out there in the retail world.
And also, every month you poll the views of auction houses, and you've touched on some of the record volumes you were seeing in January. Was there anything else that came out of your polling of the auction houses?
Demand had increased significantly just from January. And January was a large increase over December, which would be obvious to say, but we've continued to see that. Overall demand that was up 75% on January, with the other 25% saying it was about the same. So that's really, really positive. Even for demand for another measure that we've got, which is demand for hybrid and electric vehicles, that was stayed about the same as well, or actually increased with only 17%. It was lower. So even though there's some falls within some of the values of maybe some of the FEV and electric product, demand is still there, which is really positive. Conversion rates are up; they're up 84% over January, which is really positive. So I think that really gives a really good indicator of how well the market's performed and the demand out there from the trade buying network, for sure.
And time to get the crystal ball out now, as we think, obviously, what does the future look like, Jeremy? I mean, what's CAP HPI's view on how prices will perform as we enter, the all-important March plate change month, which is this Saturday? There'll be a lot of pressure on the network, especially when the plate change month falls on a Saturday as well for the administrators. Yeah. But what are your thoughts as we move into March and the final month of this quarter?
I think it's something similar. I think, there might be slightly less, given, we're going to get, a higher recycle of volumes coming back into the market, either through part exchanges or through fleet recycles. And I think, fleets are probably becoming a bit more normalized in terms of some of those fleet recycles, especially in some areas of BEV and potentially FEV as well. But I think the overall movement, we're expecting to be broadly flat. It could be, a variation of either side of that. You have a slight downward movement or a slight increase. I think it just depends. Easter is late this year, which is, I think, pretty good in terms of where the overall market will end up in terms of certainly our numbers anyway for the end of March going into April book. So yeah, we think it's going to perform broadly in line with what we've seen. I think there's still going to be lots of demand out there, and performance is still going to be pretty good.
And are you picking anything up in terms, you mentioned defleets there, but are you picking anything up in terms of retailers, order banks, part exchanges coming into the network? We talk about potential that Q1, possibly Q2, we'll still see this shortage of general product into the marketplace. What are you picking up any conversations, any sentiment from the market?
Yeah, I think we're going to see an increase in volume clearly over where we've been through February, certainly the back end of February, and I think that's just a natural increase in volumes. New car market is certainly for retail is challenging. I think is probably the best way of putting it, and it's probably more challenging for certain fuel types. But I think there's some good strong new car offers on there at the minute, so potentially it could be a good time to buy a car. As a new deal, but I think in terms of what's fleet recycle and part exchanges, there'll be an uptick, but it might not be as much as in previous years due to, I guess, maybe some fleets trying to, extend some vehicles which were due back for this March, maybe extend them for a longer period just to ease some of the RV pressures potentially on some newer product, which could help the market. And I think you're probably likely to see less part exchanges just because of where the challenges are on the retail market in the minute. So yeah, probably less but more, if that makes any sense. In terms of there'll be less than what we've seen in pre-COVID times, but there'll be more around than what we've seen potentially for from January onwards. And January did produce quite a bit of volume for us, to be honest, but February's naturally just drawn back a bit. So yeah, less but more.
Yes, less. I think you're right. I mean, we seem to be in a fairly stable marketplace. Consumer demand isn't excessive, but it's meeting supply at the minute, and supply is nicely coming into the market, but increasing, month on month, week on week at the minute. So I think, it feels like we're in a fairly stable stable marketplace, which is holding firm. And I think, the key points that you've covered there is, I think that EV market still remains very volatile, but it's the detail into the manufacturer and the makes and models within those manufacturers that some performing better than others. Some are still finding their position as a used market in terms of demand from the sector. So I think overall it seems that petrol, diesel, and the general market is fairly stable. Whether it's seasonality or normal seasonality or not, which probably many will question, but it feels a fairly stable marketplace. So, I mean, a huge thank you as always, Jeremy, for coming on to the podcast today and bringing in sort of those highlights from within the editorial and doing a bit of a dive into what happened in terms of February's used car trends. And obviously, as always, the detailed editorial is available on the cap-hpi.com website. Yeah. So that's cap-hpi.com website. Or check out any of the team there at Cap HPI, and it'll be on their LinkedIn feeds as well, where you'll be able to see that full editorial. But we must mention, because this is where really, you take the whole current and future values and LCVs into bring them to life a little bit in the forthcoming webinar, I think, Jeremy, that's on Monday the 10th of March, that's now available for people to register to into. What time is that on? Is that the normal 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock time?
2 o'clock, yeah, normal time, 2 o'clock. I'm going to share it on my LinkedIn feed in a second. So if you haven't got a link directly via the marketing team here at Solera or Cap HPI, then look for our social feeds. I think Chris Plum's already shared it on with the editorial. I'm going to reshare it in isolation, and it's always a really good update. I think from the forecasting side and from the U side as well, and certainly around LCVs and commercials, etc. from Dion. So it's good,
and it gives a good opportunity for people to get questions into it. They can get the questions into the team there, whether it is, like you say, current future values for cars or LCV commercial vehicles. It's a great opportunity to ask the team some of the questions around it. So if you've not signed up for that, then I do urge anybody to get signed up for that.
Definitely, it's a good session. It's about 45 minutes with questions at the end, so it's a good thing to join. And like you said, I think that's absolutely perfect. In terms of getting your questions in as well. If there's any questions that anyone's got, in terms of some of the insights that we've got on future projections, it's a good opportunity to come and join us and to ask some of those questions.
Well, Jeremy, many thanks for joining us. Do come back again next month to let us know how March went. But that's all for now for this special Motor Trade Radio weekday podcast. Thank you for listening. We're back with all the big car retailing headlines this weekend. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. Philip and Curtis will be back with the week's big motor retailing headlines on Saturday. Live, on demand, wherever you are, on your podcast feed.